Hello to everyone. Today we are going to talk about the topic optimizing the recovery strategies. In this case, in a Atletico de Madrid perspective, we are going to focus more on the injury rehab process and how we recover players during this complex process. So first of all, the first thing that we have to look at is the injury mechanism. In this case, it's an example of the most common injuries, the hamstring. We focused on of course, the sprint, the maximal velocity, because we know that the football is increasing the speed, and we know that our players they have to face this increasement in velocity too, because there, as we can see in the graph, there are no other exercise that can replicate the same stimulus for the muscle. That's not the sprint, the injury mechanism. So based on that, we know that the end of our rehab process, it has to end in that specific injury mechanism, in this case, max velocity. The same can be applied for the ACL ruptures that at first we saw the injury mechanism for the most common injuries, which are hamstring injuries. And in this case, we are seeing the injury mechanism from the ones that are more severe. In this case, is the ACL, and the injury mechanism is the change of direction. So here again, our main focus for this rehab process is to replicate this change of direction. This is going to be our main goal. But on the other hand, we have to understand that we have two main problems facing this injury mechanism. The first is the complexity. We cannot assess directly, for example, this change of direction, this sprint, because we don't know which of these capacities we should focus on. So at first, we need a simpler analysis, a simpler testing to our players instead of starting with such a complex drill. And on the other hand, is the risk. Of course, the injury mechanism is the most risky drill that we can face. So we have to expose gradually to that intensity to our players during the rehab. So we don't have to lose the focus that, despite the fact that our main objective at the same point is one of the most aggressive drills that we can have. So based on that, we know that the end of our rehab is going to be sprinting and the change of direction. But this is just the top of the iceberg, and we have to do a more complex assessment of the player, a continuous assessment through the whole process. So we are sure that our player can face this injury mechanism with enough guarantees of not having a re-injury that, well, as we all know, based on the epidemiology, is one of the most concerning issues that we have right now in football. This we usually start with mobility testing. We have not just muscular mobility, but also neural mobility and some articular mobility too. Most of them are passive, so we can start doing them in a very early phase of the rehab, and of course are more focused depending on the injury. But at the same point, we try to have general assessment of the player, even testing some things that are not directly related to the injury. So, for example, for us, it's very important to test the dorsiflexion of the ankle, because it is well documented that if we are not able to absorb these forces through the ankle, our knee, our hip are going to absorb more forces. So it's important to have integral screening and not just the exact injury spot that we're facing. So, for example, an ankle dorsiflexion is super important for this ACL or for groin pain. This is one example of how we show this mobility in our dashboard. We can see the values and the progression. We can see the symmetries in the bottom part and how we progress. And on the right side, based in colors, we have the percentiles compared to the group, so we can see, like in a quick glance, the problems that we are facing with that exact player. If we move on, we go into the motor control part, and we use mainly superficial EMG. So although we don't use anymore superficial EMG as part of our general screening testing during the pre-season, we are using it specifically in the injuries for this to see the activation of that specific muscle, especially after surgery, because of these neurocognitive modifications that we face after the surgery. And sometimes we even use it for training as biofeedback. In terms of motor control, we also analyze the time to stabilization. So as you can see, our testings are very progressive, so they can go all alongside the rehab process. In terms of strength, of course, strength testing is one of the main points of our assessment, because, as we all know, is the most basic physical quality. And I usually like to face the example of the ACL. That usually it is said that the ACL is like the break of the knee, and in fact, it's for me it's not an accurate comparison, because for me the ACL is more like the lights of the car, because it has a super important proprioceptive input, and the actual brakes are the muscles. So it's super important, now that we don't have the lights anymore, that at least our brakes work perfectly. So that's why assessing the strength of the hamstring, the quadriceps, and also the soleus, glutes, are super important for this type of injury. So not just hamstring and quadriceps, also other synergist muscles. Well, in terms of strength, we assess this hypertrophy through the volume symmetry, and we try to go to the pre-injury level and compare to the other limb, and this is usually done by the nutrition department. And in terms of maximal strength, we usually use this isometric test, because they are quick, safe, and reliable. So we can go all along the whole injury rehab process. So here's how we show the progression: left in blue, red right in red, and you can see and in yellow is the symmetry, and you can see the progression. And the good thing also about the isometric, part of being reliable, is that we can do that testing even the first week, which is great, having that amount of information so early during the rehab. But the problem of the maximal isometrical force is that it usually can take around 400 milliseconds to up to 3-5 seconds to reach it. And usually in sport, and more specifically in football, the way that we apply force is much quicker, so we have less time to produce force. And that's why we also test explosive strength, not just how much force, but how we recruit or how we apply that force, because this is how this is the amount of time that we have to make force or to produce force in our context. So if we are not able to produce in 50, 100 milliseconds enough force to protect our joints, then we are at risk. That's why for us, our maximal isometric force is not enough. This is an example that we assess the explosive strength, and at the same time we have the surface EMG on the special biceps femoris and semitendinous to see what's doing each of them during that quick recruitment. And this is how we differentiate both different capacities: explosive strength at 90 and 100 milliseconds, and the peak force. So we can differentiate what type of training is going to be more interesting to our player. If it's about the peak force, this maximal strength will be recommended. And if it's the explosive force, apart from this maximal strength, also isometric exercises would be recommended too. Here we can see the differences in the curves in the left and right. And this would be the whole dashboard of the strength. Up right we have the maximal force, and the bottom right the explosive strength, and in the graph bottom left the rate of force development of the player and the evolution through the process. Then we reach the power testing, and we use I believe that everyone's using now the force plates, and we have the three main injury mechanism in a very quick, reliable, and safe environment. We have the acceleration, we have a more anterior chain based, concentric phase, and acceleration more posterior chain based, and landing. So we have a lot of information in a very, very quick, safe, and reliable way to test. This is an example of us doing the CMG. And this is how we report the results with T-scores. On the top left, we can see the comparison between the best test of this player against, that's the lines, the last test, which is the bars, and the colors, that's compared to the other players of the squad. Bottom left we have the symmetries, and we have the T-scores progression on the bottom right and on top right. Apart from power, we also test plyometrics, because we don't just want powerful athletes, but we want also to be reactive. And we usually represent that in a scatter plot to see who are powerful and reactive, or if not, which is the best way to improve them, to reach them to our sweet spot, which would be to be powerful and reactive. And now that we are coming closer and closer to our injury mechanism, that's, as we said at first, our main objective. First, we have to say that we use the GPS to in this area. Okay, and at first we have to differentiate between acceleration and max velocity, and we do that through the force velocity, and in this case acceleration velocity profile, so we can have this daily or weekly data of the session, so testing the player without testing him, and that's the most accurate return to play test that we can have, because it replicates the actual demands of the player in terms of acceleration, deceleration, and velocity. Okay, and it's important also to test the deceleration, because although we are testing the decelerations in the CMJ, in the drop jump, As we can see in the graph, took it from Damian Harper, we can see that it's not the same stress for the knee, for example, horizontal deceleration than the vertical deceleration. So it's important to be sure that we are having this horizontal deceleration stimulus, and that's why we also use the GPS for the deceleration velocity profile. And here, two examples of testing that we do, not just to see the performance, but also to see the kinematics. So how we apply all this through the process? We use it in injury prevention, but in our injury prevention program, we have to differentiate between the primary prevention in a non-injured player for risk detection, for progression, and for individualization, and in the secondary in an injured player for progression, differentiate phases, and for the return to play or return to performance. So as we can see, this is a continuum. So we have to assess constantly the player to understand their necessities, and so we can adapt to the player and not the other side. This would be an example of our dashboard. So we can see in a quick glance all our players. We have mobility, we have motor control, strength, power, velocity, all the information at a quick glance. And then from here, we could go player by player or variable from variable and see the evolution of each of them. So this is our return to play process. So whenever we have this, the injury, the first thing that we do is to plan with the team. During this first phase, we do the mobility and motor control testing. Once we are in the second phase in the gym, we test hypertrophy, max force, explosive and explosive force. Now, when we move to the next step, that we are becoming closer to the return to play, we include this power and plyometric testing. And in the last phase, when we are having the on-field training, is where we take this velocity data from the GPS. And it's super important also that once we have reached the return to play, once the player is integrated with the team, we need a follow-up, at least 2 months, because as we know, the main moment that we have pre-injuries is during these 2 months after the return to play. So it's important to still monitoring the player through that process. That's why this injury prevention program is a continuous assessment of the players, and not just after, but also during the rehab. So it's important also to highlight the fact that the return to play process, it has to be a shared decision making. So it's not just the data, it's not just the coach, it's not just the athlete, it's all together. We analyze all the information that we have in the table. We have to communicate, we have to speak, we have to debate, and then taking into consideration all the environment, then we make a decision all together, because communication is one of the keys to work as a team. So the main conclusions of this presentation are: the first one, the physical demands in sport are increasing and we have to face them. The sprint and change of direction are the main injury mechanism. 3, that the rehab must expand progressively to these mechanisms. 4, return to performance implies a continuous assessment. And 5, that the return to performance must be a team process. Thank you very much.